Before we begin, if you're listening to this alone at night, you're exactly where you should be. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more true horror stories, disturbing encounters, and unexplained events uploaded every day. Now lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let's get into tonight's stories. The first radio call sounded routine. Unit 3, can you check slip 12? I looked at the clock. 2:08 a.m. A loose mooring line wasn't unusual. Boats drifted all the time when the tide changed. I grabbed my flashlight, signed out the utility cart, and headed toward the far end of the harbor. Less than 20 minutes later, I was standing in front of a boat that didn't exist on the harbor's registration list. Someone had tied it up perfectly. The ropes were still wet, but there wasn't a single footprint on the dock. My name is Ethan. I worked overnight security at a commercial harbor outside Seattle. Most of my job involved checking locked gates, inspecting piers, and making sure nobody wandered into restricted areas after closing. It wasn't exciting work. The same patrol, the same radio calls, the same fishermen leaving before sunrise. After a while, you begin recognizing every boat by sight, even in complete darkness. That was why the vessel at slip 12 bothered me immediately. I'd never seen it before. It was an older white fishing boat, about 30 feet long. No running lights, no cabin lights, no registration numbers. Even the name on the stern had been scraped away. Freshly, I called the harbor office. Do we have a late arrival? The dispatcher checked the computer. No vessels assigned to slip 12. I walked onto the dock. The ropes securing the boat were tied with perfect sailor's knots. Whoever moored it knew exactly what they were doing. I knocked on the cabin door. No answer. I shined my flashlight through the side window. The cabin looked abandoned. Dust covered the dashboard. Spider webs stretched across the steering wheel. It looked like no one had stepped inside for years. Then, water dripped onto my shoulder. I looked up. The cabin roof was completely dry. No rain. No leaking pipes. Nothing above me. Another drop landed on the dock. Then another. They weren't falling from above. They were falling from underneath the boat. I crouched beside the dock and aimed my flashlight beneath the hull. The beam reflected off calm black water. Then, a pale hand slowly disappeared beneath the surface. I jerked backward. The water settled immediately. Nothing remained except small ripples. I radioed dispatch. I may have someone in the water. Within minutes, another security officer named Ray arrived. I explained what I'd seen. Together we searched the entire slip using spotlights. No swimmer. No body. Nothing. Ray laughed. Probably a seal. I wanted to believe him. Before leaving, I checked the mooring lines one last time. One rope had been untied. Not loosened. Untied. The knot now rested neatly on the dock beside the cleat. Neither of us had touched it. The following night, slip 12 was empty. No mysterious boat. No loose ropes. Nothing unusual. Then my radio crackled. Unit 3. Unauthorized vessel reported at slip 12. I stared at the empty water. The dispatcher continued. Can you confirm? I answered slowly. It's empty. Long silence. Then the dispatcher replied. Negative. Our harbor camera shows a boat tied there. I hurried back to the security office. Camera 9 overlooked slip 12. On the monitor, the fishing boat sat exactly where I'd seen it the night before. Clear as day. I looked out the office window toward the actual dock. Nothing. Only empty water. Back to the monitor. The boat remained. Someone walked onto the dock. A man wearing a yellow rain jacket. He stopped beside the boat, looked directly toward the security camera, then raised one hand. Not waving. Pointing. Straight at me. The monitor instantly filled with static. The next morning, the harbor master reviewed the recordings. Frame by frame. The boat appeared on camera for exactly 12 minutes. No arrival. No departure. It simply appeared, then disappeared. Curious. I searched old harbor records. After several hours, I found one handwritten maintenance log. One sentence had been underlined decades earlier. Slip 12 closed until further notice. No explanation. No report attached. I asked one of the oldest dock workers about it. He looked toward the water before answering. They reopened it. Why was it closed? He shrugged. People kept tying up there. So, they never checked out. A week later, A storm rolled across the harbor. High winds, heavy rain. Almost every boat rocked violently against the docks. My patrol took me back to slip 12. The white fishing boat had returned. This time, its cabin light was on. Someone stood inside, watching me through the rain-covered window. I couldn't make out a face, only the outline of a person. Perfectly still. My radio suddenly came alive. Not dispatch, not another officer. Just a quiet voice, almost drowned out by static. "Your line's secure. Come aboard." I backed away without taking my eyes off the boat. When I reached the parking lot, I looked back one final time. The slip was empty again. Several months later, I transferred to a different security job, away from the waterfront, away from overnight patrols. I still visit the harbor occasionally, mostly during daylight. Families walk the docks. Tour boats come and go. Everything feels perfectly normal, except for one section. Slip 12. It's always empty, no matter how crowded the marina becomes. People seem to avoid it without realizing why. And whenever the tide is especially high, I notice fresh mooring ropes tied neatly around the cleats. Perfect sailor's knots, leading down into empty water, as though someone has just finished docking a boat that only arrives after midnight. Don't shine your light into the water. That was the first thing the old dock foreman told me on my overnight shift. He didn't explain why. He simply pointed toward the harbor and added, "If something looks back at you, walk away." I laughed. I'd spent most of my life around the ocean. I've seen seals, sea lions, even sharks. None of that worried me. By sunrise, I realized he wasn't talking about wildlife. My name is Mason. I worked nights at one of the largest commercial harbors on the West Coast. Cargo ships arrived around the clock. Container cranes never seemed to stop moving. Tugboats guided vessels through narrow channels while dock crews loaded freight until morning. The place looked alive 24 hours a day. But once you stepped beyond the floodlights, the harbor became strangely quiet, almost like the darkness swallowed every sound. My assignment that week was simple. Inspect the outer cargo piers every hour. Check security fences. Confirm emergency exits stayed unlocked. Report damaged equipment. Most patrols took nearly 40 minutes. I usually walked alone. Just after 2 in the morning, I reached the end of Pier 7. The tide was unusually calm. Not a single ripple disturbed the surface. That alone felt strange. Harbor water is almost never perfectly still. As I turned to leave, something knocked gently against one of the wooden pilings below. Knock. 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 It sounded deliberate, almost like someone tapping from underneath the dock. I leaned over the railing and aimed my flashlight downward. Nothing. Only dark water reflecting the pier lights. Then, another tap, much closer, directly beneath my boots. I stepped back. The knocking stopped immediately. When I radioed the control room, they suggested floating debris had struck the pilings. Reasonable explanation. Until the next night. The tide was low, much lower than before. Large sections of the support columns were exposed. As I reached the same spot, I noticed fresh wet footprints crossing the dock. Bare feet. They started near the edge of the pier, walked 20 yards inland, then ended. No return prints. No hiding places. No doors nearby. Just stopped. I followed them anyway. The final print rested beside an emergency life ring. Hanging from the ring was a small brass key. Harbor maintenance keys were silver. This one wasn't. Stamped into the metal were 2 words. Lock 9. There wasn't a lock 9 anywhere in the harbor. I pocketed the key and continued my patrol. By the time I reached the security office, the key was gone. The empty pocket was still damp with seawater. I convinced myself I'd dropped it somewhere. A few evenings later, one of the tugboat captains stopped me near the fuel dock. Without any warning, he asked, "Anybody offer you a key yet?" I froze. "What?" He shrugged. "They usually start with that." Before I could ask another question, his radio called him away. That answer stayed with me. Near the end of my shift, dispatch reported an alarm from an unused service pier. The location had been abandoned after newer terminals opened. Nobody should have been there. I drove over in a utility truck. The security gate stood open. The chain still hung through the lock, unbroken. Yet somehow, The gate had swung wide enough for a vehicle to pass. Beyond it, I found an old loading dock I'd never noticed before. Most of it had collapsed into the harbor. Only one section remained intact. Bolted to the concrete wall sat a rusted metal door. Above it, barely visible beneath layers of peeling paint, was a faded number. 9. My pulse quickened. The brass key suddenly dropped onto the dock beside my boot. I hadn't heard footsteps. Nobody stood nearby. Yet there it was, covered in seawater. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. The lock turned effortlessly. The heavy door creaked open only a few inches. Cold air rushed out. Not salty ocean air. Dry. Stale. Almost like an old basement. I shined my flashlight inside. Concrete stairs disappeared underground. Far below, I heard waves. Impossible. The harbor was outside, not beneath me. Then, someone spoke from the darkness. Very softly. Close the door. The voice sounded exhausted, almost pleading. Before I reacted, another voice echoed from much deeper below. No, leave it open. The two voices overlapped, one begging me to leave, the other begging me to stay. I slammed the door shut, locked it, backed away. The moment the lock clicked, every harbor light along the shoreline flickered at once. When they stabilized, the metal door was gone. Only a cracked concrete wall remained. No doorway, no lock, no number, nothing. The next morning, I searched old engineering blueprints. After hours of digging, I found a map of the original harbor construction. One underground service tunnel had once connected the old pier to an inland pump station. The tunnel had been permanently sealed. Its identification number, Lock 9. No explanation accompanied the closure. Only a handwritten note. Do not reopen during high tide. I transferred to daytime operations shortly afterward. My supervisor assumed I wanted better hours. I never corrected him. To this day, whenever I visit a harbor, I instinctively avoid looking beneath old piers, especially during high tide, because somewhere below those docks, there's still a locked doorway. One voice desperately wants it to remain closed. The other has been waiting a very long time for someone curious enough to turn the key again. The shipping container wasn't supposed to be there. I know that sounds impossible. Modern ports track everything. Every trailer, every crane. Every container has an ID number, a destination, and a place in the yard. If one goes missing, someone notices within minutes. That's why the dispatcher sounded so confused when I reported the blue container sitting alone at the end of Pier 4. According to the computer, that section of the dock was completely empty. By the time anyone else arrived, the container was gone, but the tire marks leading to it weren't. My name is Tyler. I worked overnight as a yard coordinator at a busy cargo harbor outside Savannah. Most of my shift involved directing truck traffic, checking container numbers, and making sure loading crews stayed on schedule. The port never really slept. Even after midnight, cranes moved steel boxes from ships to waiting trailers while tugboats guided freighters toward open berths. Everything depended on timing. One misplaced container could delay hundreds of shipments. So when I found one sitting where nothing should have been, I assumed someone had made a paperwork mistake. The container stood alone beneath a broken floodlight. Dark blue, 40 feet long. No company logo. No hazard placards. No serial number. Just layers of chipped paint. I walked around it twice. Normally, container numbers are impossible to miss. This one had been sanded completely smooth. I radioed dispatch. Got an unidentified container at Pier 4. The dispatcher answered almost immediately. Negative. Pier 4's clear. I'm looking at it. Silence. Then, stay where you are. I waited. 5 minutes later, 2 supervisors arrived in pickup trucks. The floodlight still flickered above us. The tire tracks remained fresh in the gravel. The container was gone. Neither supervisor believed I'd imagined the tracks. Something heavy had definitely been sitting there. But nothing could explain how a 40-foot container disappeared without a crane. Maintenance blamed an equipment mix-up. I wasn't convinced. The following night, I intentionally checked Pier 4 first. Nothing. I relaxed, until I noticed something strange on the ground. A fresh shipping seal, still attached to its metal cable. Normally, Those seals break only after a container reaches its destination. This one had never been locked onto anything. Stamped into the metal were 6 numbers. 441,903. I handed it to the operations office. No shipment in the system matched that number. A veteran crane operator saw the seal on my desk. His expression changed immediately. "Where'd you find that?" "Pier 4. He quietly pushed it back toward me. I would have left it there. Before I could ask why, he walked away. 3 nights later, heavy fog rolled in from the water. Visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. The harbor sounded different. Crane alarms echoed strangely. Ship horns seemed farther away than they should have been. Even the waves felt muted. Around 2:30, dispatch lost contact with one of the straddle carriers working near Pier 4. The operator stopped answering the radio. I drove over to check. The vehicle sat exactly where GPS said it would. Engine running. Headlights on. Cab empty. The driver's hard hat rested neatly on the seat. His radio still transmitted static. Then, I heard a metallic bang. From somewhere inside the fog. Another. Closer this time. It sounded exactly like a shipping container door being closed. I followed the noise, step by step, until the blue container emerged through the fog. Exactly where I'd first seen it. This time, its doors were open. The inside should have been dark. Instead, soft white light spilled onto the dock. I stepped closer, expecting stacked cargo. Wooden pallets. Anything. The container was far larger inside than outside. A narrow metal hallway stretched into the distance. Rows of identical cargo doors lined both sides. Each one carried a shipping seal. Each seal displayed the same number, 441,903. Then, one of the doors slammed shut somewhere deep inside. Another followed, then another, one after another, like a chain reaction moving toward me. I backed away immediately. Just before reaching the dock, I heard footsteps, running, inside the container, getting closer. The hallway lights flickered. A man's voice shouted, "Don't let them close it." The footsteps were almost at the entrance. I grabbed one of the container doors and pulled with everything I had. The steel slammed shut. The impact echoed across the harbor. Everything became silent. When I turned around, the fog had lifted. Morning light was beginning to appear over the water. The blue container was gone. Only one object remained on the dock. A broken shipping seal. Number 441,903. The missing straddle carrier operator was found nearly an hour later, walking alone along the waterfront, confused, unable to explain where he'd been. He remembered driving toward Pier 4, then nothing else. He retired less than a month later. No one ever learned what happened. Curiosity kept bothering me. Weeks later, I searched old port records stored in the administration building. Buried inside decades of cargo logs, I found one handwritten incident report. The container number wasn't listed, only the seal number, 441,903. Beside it, someone had written in red ink, "Do not break the seal." There were no additional pages, no explanation, no signatures, just those 5 words. I left harbor work shortly afterward. These days, I drive deliveries that never go anywhere near the waterfront. People sometimes ask if I miss working around the ships. The truth is, I miss almost everything about it. The gulls, the fog, the cranes, the sound of tugboats before sunrise. Just not Pier 4. Because somewhere beyond the loading docks, there's still a blue shipping container with no identification numbers, waiting to be unloaded, waiting for someone curious enough to step inside. And if you ever find yourself walking through a cargo yard late at night, pay attention to the seals. Because if every door carries the same number, you're no longer standing inside a shipping container. You're standing somewhere that was never meant to be opened.